Welcome to a Sherlock Holmes mystery. A Christmas guest arrives unannounced. A letter burns, and secrets whisper through snow-covered halls. But before we step inside Pennington Hall, where in the world are you following this tale tonight? It was upon the eve of Christmas, in that memorable winter of '89, when London lay buried under a thick quilt of snow, that I found myself once more at Baker Street. The familiar brass knocker of 221B bore a crust of ice, and the gas lamps threw long, golden fingers across the whitened street. Inside, a contrasting warmth awaited Holmes. His long form bent over the fireplace. He was engaged in his peculiar occupation of playing the violin while studying the curling smoke from his pipe, as though divining prophecy from its shapes. "Ah, Watson!" he exclaimed as I entered, setting aside the instrument. "The season of goodwill. And yet, if I may venture a prediction, tonight shall bring neither goodwill nor peace to at least one household in England." I smiled, removing my gloves. "Surely, Holmes, even you must admit a touch of sentiment in the air. London has turned charitable. I saw no fewer than 5 gentlemen distributing coins to carolers on my way here." "Indeed," Holmes murmured, his eyes gleaming. "And yet, my dear fellow, there is no season more suited for crime. Christmas sentimentality blinds reason. Who suspects deceit under the mistletoe?" He had scarcely spoken when the sharp rap of the downstairs bell cut through the air. Mrs. Hudson's brisk steps were followed by the sound of voices, one anxious, the other trembling. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, flustered. "He says it's a matter of grave urgency." The man who entered was no ordinary petitioner. His figure was tall, though stooped with distress, and his fine wool overcoat bore traces of hurried travel. His moustache and side whiskers were flecked with melting snow, and his gloves were still damp from the cold. "I must apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice low and nervous. "My name is Sir Alaric Pennington of Surrey. I have come to you not merely in confusion, but in fear." Holmes gestured him to the armchair nearest the fire. "Pray, compose yourself, Sir Alaric. Dr. Watson and I are entirely at your service." Sir Alaric leaned forward, gloved hands clasped. "I am host this Christmas to a family gathering at Pennington Hall. My sister, my nephew, and several friends of the family are in attendance. But there is one among them who should not be there." Holmes raised a brow. "An intruder under your own roof, an uninvited guest," the baronet said gravely. "A man claiming to be my late wife's cousin, Mr. Bernard Crail. He appeared on the evening of the 23rd, bearing letters of introduction that, though seemingly genuine, have now raised my suspicion. His manner, his stories, his handwriting, there is something wrong about it all, and yet every proof he offers seems impeccable." Watson interjected gently. "Have you reason to believe this man means harm?" Sir Alaric hesitated. "Last night, my butler found him wandering the west wing, my wife's old chambers, at 2 in the morning. When confronted, he claimed he was lost. This morning, one of the household guests, a young lady named Miss Eleanor Vance, discovered her jewel case open and a brooch missing. It was returned mysteriously an hour later, laid upon her pillow. The servants whisper already of ghosts." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Ghosts, Sir Alaric, do not sign their names in forged ink, nor walk in the shape of gentlemen." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Your guest intrigues me exceedingly. You did well to come." The baronet exhaled with visible relief. "Then you will come to Surrey? Tonight, if possible? The Christmas Eve dinner begins at 8. If this man is, and what I fear, I dread what mischief he might attempt when the hall is filled with wine and laughter." Holmes glanced toward the frosted window. "The 8:15 train from Waterloo will deliver us to your village before the first toast is raised. Watson, bring your revolver. This promises to be no ordinary holiday visit." As we prepared to depart, Holmes turned briefly toward me. his voice low but filled with anticipation. "Mark my words, Watson. An uninvited guest, a vanished brooch, and letters too perfect to be true, these are the preludes to something darker. Christmas has always been the season of masks, and I fancy before this night ends, one will be torn away." And with that, we stepped into the biting wind, bound for Pennington Hall, unaware that the snow-covered countryside concealed not joy, but a chilling deception yet to unfold. The journey from London to Surrey that evening was one of muffled silence, the train cutting through veils of snow like a ghost through mist. Holmes sat opposite me, motionless save for the rhythmic tapping of his long fingers upon the carriage window. He spoke little, his eyes distant yet alight, with that peculiar gleam which I had come to recognize as the herald of intellectual delight. I attempted conversation once or twice, but his responses were clipped, abstract, his mind evidently absorbed in the enigma of Sir Alaric's tale. When at last we arrived at Pennington Halt, the hour was nearing 8, and the wind swept across the platform with cruel vigor. A carriage awaited us, its lamps dimmed by frost. The driver, a stooped man in livery, identified himself as Griggs, the baronet's coachman. Holmes questioned him briefly during the short drive, extracting more from the man's few words than most could from an hour's conversation. "The gentleman, Mr. Crail, sir, he's smooth as silk," Griggs muttered, steering through the white-blanketed lane. "Knows everyone's name already, though he claims never to have met them before. Talks fine, too, but the maids say he stares when he thinks no one's looking. Gives them the shivers, he does." Holmes leaned back. "Does he now? And how long have you served the family, Griggs?" 17 years come spring, sir." "Then you have a good eye for truth and pretense, I imagine." The man chuckled grimly. "Aye, and I say this, if he's kin to Lady Pennington, then I'm the Archbishop of Canterbury." The drive ended before the great oak doors of Pennington Hall. It was a fine old house, its gables and chimneys outlined faintly in snowlight. A place of wealth and tradition, but the flickering lamps behind the curtained windows seemed to waver with unease rather than comfort. A butler, pale and proper, received us and ushered us into the grand entryway. Sir Alaric came forward at once, visibly relieved. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you are here. Thank heaven. The dinner is about to begin. My guests are unaware of your true purpose. I have said merely that you are acquaintances from London." "Quite so," Holmes replied. "For now, discretion serves us best. Let us observe before we act." We were soon introduced to the company. Miss Eleanor Vance, a fair-haired young lady of nervous grace. Mr. Arthur Pennington, Sir Alaric's nephew, whose eyes shifted restlessly even in polite conversation. And lastly, the man himself, Mr. Bernard Crail. He was tall, with a narrow, almost ascetic face, and hair touched faintly with grey. His manner was courteous indeed, excessively so, and his smile came too easily, like that of an actor overly conscious of his audience. Yet his eyes, dark and sharp beneath their hooded lids, betrayed something that did not match the rest. When his gaze fell upon Holmes, there was a flicker, so slight one might have missed it, a momentary contraction of the pupils, a tightening at the corners of the mouth. Holmes's response was merely a polite bow. But I saw that his mind had seized upon the detail like a hawk sighting movement in the grass. Dinner passed amid formal pleasantries. Crail spoke fluently of places abroad, Vienna, Florence, Cairo, and did so with a scholar's assurance. Holmes allowed him to talk, occasionally prompting with a mild inquiry that drew out small contradictions. Once, when Crail mentioned the British consulate in Rome, Holmes asked quietly, "Would that have been under Sir Edward Malvern's tenure?" Crail hesitated a pause, no longer than the blink of an eye, then smiled smoothly. "Yes, precisely so. A fine gentleman." Holmes said nothing further, but later, as dessert was served, he scribbled a small note upon the edge of his napkin and concealed it within his sleeve. After dinner, As the guests dispersed toward the drawing room, Holmes and I were left briefly alone. He turned to me, his expression keen. "Watson, the gentleman lies. Sir Edward Malvern never served as consul in Rome. He was posted to Naples, and died there. In our friend Crale's knowledge is borrowed, not lived." "What, then, do you suspect?" I whispered. "That," said Holmes, "is what we shall soon confirm. But observe, his right cuff is frayed at the edge, the stitching foreign, and his boots bear a red clay one finds not in Surrey, but in the northern counties. The man who claims to have come from Florence, I would wager, has lately been in Yorkshire." Sir Alaric rejoined us, his face drawn. "Mr. Holmes, I beg you say nothing yet. If this man is what you suspect, I fear his purpose is not merely deceit." Holmes's gaze drifted toward the hallway, where Crale's figure vanished among the guests. "Nor do I, Sir Alaric," he said softly. "For if I am correct, your uninvited guest has not come for gold or jewels, but for something infinitely more dangerous." The drawing room at Pennington Hall was a study in opulence, deep crimson drapes, a roaring hearth, and portraits of solemn ancestors glowering from gilded frames. Yet beneath the veneer of Christmas cheer, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the company. Miss Eleanor played softly at the piano, her trembling fingers failing to steady the melody, while Sir Alaric attempted conversation that fell flat in the charged air. Crale, ever courteous, stood by the mantel, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, watching everyone, yet never seeming to fix upon one face for long. Holmes, with deceptive indolence, lounged in an armchair near the fire, his gaze half-lidded and thoughtful. I joined him with a glass of port, lowering my voice. "You believe him to be an impostor, then?" Holmes's lips curved faintly. "I do not believe, Watson. I observe. And I observe a man who measures each movement, each word, as if rehearsed. No genuine relation of Sir Alaric could speak of the late Lady Pennington's Italian heritage without mentioning the Contessa di Parma, her most famous cousin. Yet Crale made no reference. Curious, is it not?" Before I could answer, Crale's smooth voice drifted toward us. "You are a man of some renown, Mr. Holmes. I must confess, your methods are the subject of conversation even abroad. One wonders, however, whether deduction can truly pierce the mystery of human nature." Holmes looked up lazily. "One wonders indeed," he replied. "Perhaps you would care to test it." A flicker of amusement crossed Crale's features. "Gladly, if you promise not to make a fool of me before such distinguished company." "I make no promises," said Holmes. "Permit me only to glance at your watch chain." Crale hesitated, then complied, drawing out a slender gold chain with an ornate fob attached. Holmes examined it, turning the piece gently between his fingers. "Curious," he murmured. "A fine Roman design, yet the metal bears no mark of European craftsmanship. The pivot of the clasp Indian manufacture, mid-19th century. You purchased it not in Rome, but in Calcutta, during the time of the cholera outbreak in '87. Crale's smile faltered. "A remarkable guess." "Not a guess," said Holmes quietly. "Merely observation." For a moment, the room seemed to contract. Crale's fingers tightened around the fob before he restored it to his waistcoat and turned away, laughter a shade too light in his voice. "You are indeed formidable, Mr. Holmes, but I assure you, I was in Europe that year." Holmes inclined his head. "Doubtless." Sir Alaric, who had been listening with anxious interest, drew Holmes aside as soon as Crale turned his back. "You see, Mr. Holmes, even his possessions contradict him. But why this deception? What could he possibly want?" "That," Holmes replied, "is the single thread we must trace. The motive is the key. Tell me, Sir Alaric, was your late wife in possession of anything unusual? A document, heirloom, or letter of sensitive nature?" Sir Alaric frowned. "Not that I recall," She was fond of her correspondence, but most of it was destroyed after her passing. Only a few personal letters remain locked in the escritoire in her old chamber. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And Mr. Crail was found there last night. Yes, claiming he had lost his way. Then, my dear Watson, Holmes murmured, we may safely infer that his true path lies in the direction of that escritoire. At that instant, the lights flickered. A gust of cold air swept through the room, extinguishing one of the candles. Miss Eleanor gave a small cry. The butler hurried to shut the window, muttering about the storm. When the candles flared again, Crail had vanished. Gone, Holmes said sharply. Sir Alaric, where does the west corridor lead? To the family wing, Lady Pennington's rooms. Holmes was already moving. I followed, heart pounding, down the long, echoing hallway lined with portraits. The wind moaned through the old stone, and somewhere in the distance a door slammed. Holmes quickened his pace, lantern raised, until we reached the heavy oak door of the late lady's chamber. It stood ajar. Inside, the fire was cold, the air tinged with dust and lilac perfume. By the faint light, I saw the escritoire drawers thrown open, papers scattered upon the rug. Holmes stooped, examining a torn envelope. His voice was a low murmur. Sealing wax, Italian, marked with the crest of the Medici family, Lady Pennington's maternal line. This is no petty thief, Watson. This man searches for history itself. A sudden sound, a soft creak, drew our eyes toward the half-open wardrobe. Holmes motioned for silence. Step by step, he approached, flung open the door, and thrust the lantern inside. The light fell upon Crail's face, white as the snow outside, eyes wide, a pistol clutched in his hand. Stay where you are, Holmes said calmly. You've overplayed your part, Mr. Crail. It's time we dispensed with masks. The impostor's voice trembled, yet there was a strange resolve in it. You do not understand, Mr. Holmes. I came not to steal, but to prevent something far worse. And with that cryptic declaration, he raised the pistol, not toward us, but toward himself. Crail's hand trembled as the pistol wavered in the lamplight, his eyes wild yet resolute. For a breathless moment, none of us moved. The snow-laden wind howled against the windows, the fire hissed in the grate, and the scent of old lilac lingered like a ghost from the past. Then Holmes stepped forward, his tone calm but commanding. You are not a murderer, Mr. Crail. Lower the weapon. There is reason still to be found in your actions, if reason truly drives them. Crail's lips quivered. You do not understand, he whispered hoarsely. She left behind something that must never be read, something that could destroy more than one name in this house. His eyes darted toward Sir Alaric, who had entered behind us, face drained of color. I came to take it before others could, but I swear to you, Holmes, I am no thief. Holmes's gaze never wavered. You speak of Lady Pennington's papers. What is in them that warrants so grave a warning? Crail hesitated, sweat glistening at his temple. A letter, he said at last, his voice cracking. A confession she wrote on her deathbed, addressed to a man named Lucien Ferrand, a French attaché she once loved before her marriage. That letter, it concerns the true parentage of your nephew. His eyes flickered to Sir Alaric again, whose expression turned to one of stunned disbelief. My nephew? The baronet stammered. Arthur? Crail nodded miserably. He is not your brother's son, but Ferrand's. Lady Pennington wished to spare the family shame, but someone who knew has been blackmailing you from the shadows. That is why I came. I was sent to destroy the letter, to end the leverage before it ruined you. Holmes's voice dropped to a deadly quiet. And who sent you? A flicker of torment crossed Crail's face. A man called Marston. He knew Ferrand in Paris. He paid me handsomely and warned that if the letter surfaced, scandal would tear through every drawing room in London. The pistol sagged in Crail's hand, his strength failing. I moved forward quickly, grasping it from him before he could resist. Holmes knelt, his fingers darting over the scattered papers. At last he found what he sought, a small, folded letter sealed with the Medici crest. He held it to the light, examining the wax. "Untouched," he murmured. He spoke truth on at least this point. "You have not opened it." "No," Crail said wearily. "I could not. I saw her portrait as I entered, and could not bring myself to destroy her last words." Holmes stood, his eyes grave. "Then you have, despite yourself, done justice rather than crime." He turned to Sir Alaric. "You must decide, sir, whether the truth of this letter is better sealed forever or read and endured." Sir Alaric's hand trembled as he took the envelope. "If what he says is true, I must know it. Secrets breed poison." Holmes inclined his head. "Then allow me, for form's sake, to witness the reading." Sir Alaric broke the seal, unfolding the yellowed paper. The handwriting was delicate but firm. He read silently, his face shifting from sorrow to shock, then to a calm resignation. At length, he folded the letter again and pressed it to his chest. "She wrote the truth," he said softly. "Arthur is no Pennington by blood, but he is by heart and by upbringing. No scandal shall touch him. The letter shall be burned, and with it the shadow of deceit." Crail bowed his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "Then I have done what I came for." Holmes regarded him keenly. "Your service to justice was unwitting, but sincere. I shall speak with Lestrade. You will answer for your trespass, but leniency will be urged." As we led Crail from the chamber, the clock struck midnight. Through the long windows, snow fell softly upon the dark gardens, and the bells of the distant village church rang out the first notes of Christmas morning. Holmes paused by the door, glancing back at the fading firelight. "Strange, Watson," he murmured. "We chase villains through the fog and find, at the heart of it, only human frailty. Perhaps no man is entirely guilty or entirely innocent. Even deception at times hides a desperate kind of virtue." And as we descended the grand staircase, the chill of the hall gave way to a quiet peace, the kind that follows confession, when truth, however bitter, has at last been spoken aloud. The first light of Christmas morning crept across the snowbound lawns of Pennington Hall, turning the drifts to a quiet blaze of gold. Within, the mood was subdued. The events of the night had left every soul restless. Holmes, however, appeared invigorated by the storm that had passed. He sat at the breakfast table, fingers steepled, his eyes half closed as though continuing some private experiment of logic. Crail had been confined to a guest chamber under light guard until the constabulary could be summoned, while Sir Alaric had retired to his study with the unreadable calm of a man who had glimpsed both ruin and redemption in a single page of handwriting. I poured Holmes a cup of coffee and ventured to speak. "You appear remarkably tranquil, my dear Holmes, considering the emotional tempest we've just weathered." "Most men would be shaken." He smiled faintly. "Emotion is the enemy of precision, Watson. When others quiver, I calculate. Yet, I confess," he added, gazing toward the frost-clouded window, "there is an elegance in this affair that appeals to me, a deception not for profit, but for preservation." Before I could reply, the door opened and Miss Eleanor Vance entered, pale but composed. She held a folded note in her hand. "Sir Alaric asked me to deliver this to you, Mr. Holmes. He requests your presence in the study at once." Holmes rose, taking the note but not opening it. "Thank you, Miss Vance. And may I commend your courage last night. It is not every lady who remains steady under such circumstances." A faint color touched her cheeks. "It was your calm that steadied us all, sir," she said softly, then turned and left. Holmes and I found Sir Alaric seated before the dying embers, the now burned letter resting in the hearth's ashes. The scent of scorched wax lingered in the air. He looked up as we entered, his expression grave but untroubled. "The deed is done," he said quietly. "No trace remains. I have sent a message to the local constable regarding Mr. Crale's arrest, but I would beg of you, Mr. Holmes, to ensure the truth of this matter never reaches the public ear." Holmes inclined his head. "Discretion is my trade as much as deduction, Sir Alaric. But there is a point that troubles me still. Crale's story was incomplete. The name Marston, did it signify anything to you?" The baronet hesitated, his fingers tightening on the chair's arm. "Marston," he repeated slowly. "There was a man by that name, Henry Marston, who served my late wife's father as secretary in Florence many years ago. A clever but unscrupulous fellow. He vanished after embezzling a considerable sum." "Precisely," Holmes murmured, his eyes brightening. "I suspected as much. You see, Marston's signature appeared faintly embossed on the corner of the forged letters your guest presented. A hidden mark of authorship, known only to those who write professionally in deceit. He no doubt prepared the letters himself to establish Crale's supposed identity and intended to recover that confession later for his own gain." "Then Crale was merely a pawn," I said. "Exactly. A criminal's tool, but one with a conscience that rebelled too late." Holmes turned to Sir Alaric. "You have been fortunate, sir. There was more at stake here than reputation. Had Marston obtained that letter, he might have held you hostage for life. Now, at least, the chain is broken." Sir Alaric's shoulders sank with relief. "You have my deepest gratitude, Mr. Holmes." "How shall I repay you?" Holmes smiled thinly. "By taking better care of your correspondence in future. Few men are ruined by what they do, most by what they write." We left Pennington Hall soon after. The storm cleared and the sky a pale, forgiving blue. Crale, subdued and remorseful, was escorted by the constable's men. As we stepped into the waiting carriage, he turned to Holmes. "I was a fool, Mr. Holmes, but I meant no harm. If you ever see Marston again, tell him he made me a liar against my will." Holmes's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I shall, though I doubt I ever shall see him. Men like Marston seldom appear twice before justice. They vanish between the cracks they dig for others." The carriage rolled away through the white countryside. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then Holmes said quietly, "It is curious, Watson, how the season of goodwill so often breeds duplicity. Perhaps because it tempts men to disguise their true selves under the mask of virtue." I smiled ruefully. "And yet, Holmes, even in deceit there may dwell a spark of decency, as with Crale." He looked at me thoughtfully. "Quite so. The difference between sinner and savior is often a mere decision taken 1 minute too late." When at last we reached Baker Street that evening, the familiar fog had returned, wrapping the city in its grey silence. Holmes tossed his coat aside, stretched before the fire, and said with a glint of satisfaction, "Well, Watson, another Christmas spent in pursuit of truth. Not the merriest of holidays, but perhaps the most fitting." And I, watching the snow drift past the window, could not help but think that somewhere beneath Holmes's cool exterior lay a warmth unspoken, a compassion that found expression not in sentiment, but in the relentless preservation of truth. It was, in its own peculiar way, the purest kind of Christmas spirit. The days that followed our return to Baker Street passed in a curious quietude. London was slowly emerging from its Christmas slumber. Shopkeepers clearing the last of the holly from their windows, cabmen shaking the frost from their horses' manes, and children laughing in the streets with the delight that only a holiday can bring. Yet within our familiar lodgings, a different stillness held sway. Holmes spent long hours at his desk, surrounded by chemical flasks and loose newspaper clippings, his mind clearly occupied with some unfinished strand of the Pennington affair. I had thought the case concluded, but experience had taught me that my friend rarely considered a matter closed until every thread, however invisible, had been neatly tied. On the morning of the third day, as I was reading the Times, Holmes abruptly rose from his chair, tossing aside a telegram he had just received. "Watson," he said briskly, "it seems our friend Mr. Crale's story is not quite over. The Surrey Constabulary reports that the man Marston has been seen alive and quite active in London." "Marston? Here? I thought you said such men vanish." "They do, usually," Holmes replied, reaching for his coat. "But when their vanishing act is incomplete, it is because greed outweighs caution. Marston no doubt believes himself beyond suspicion. Come, Watson. There is a faint scent of unfinished business in the air, and I intend to trace it." An hour later, we were seated in a cab, the city fog closing around us like a heavy curtain. Holmes's eyes, sharp and bright beneath his hat brim, searched the streets as if reading a text invisible to other men. The telegram stated. He said that Marston was seen entering a boarding house near Russell Square, a modest establishment catering to transients. He has come to collect what he believes still lies unclaimed, perhaps to confirm that the letter is truly destroyed. We arrived at the address, a narrow building with a brass sign reading Mrs. Tilbury's Lodgings. Holmes knocked, and the door was answered by a nervous landlady who recognized the name of Scotland Yard far quicker than that of Sherlock Holmes. Within moments, we were shown upstairs to a dim corridor where the faint smell of tobacco and cheap gin lingered. Holmes moved with the quiet precision of a cat. At the far end of the passage, he halted before a closed door. "He is inside," he whispered. "The lamp is burning low. Listen." We heard movement, a chair scraping softly, then the unmistakable rustle of papers. Holmes gave a nod, turned the handle, and entered without knocking. The man at the desk sprang up, a sharp-faced figure in a shabby coat, his hand darting toward his pocket. Holmes's revolver was out before I could blink. "No use, Mr. Marston," he said coolly. "Your accomplice has already confessed. You will kindly remain still." Marston's eyes narrowed. Accomplice? That fool Crale. He was never meant for subtle work. Subtlety has never been the refuge of blackmailers, Holmes replied. You forged the letters introducing Crale to Sir Alaric. You instructed him to recover a certain document, promising him pay for its destruction, but in truth, you meant to claim it yourself and sell its contents to the gossip press. Marston sneered. And if I did? The letter is gone, now burned, you say. So what crime remains? Holmes smiled thinly. The crime of intent, sir. Scotland Yard will take pleasure in reopening your past embezzlement in Florence. The handwriting upon those forged letters will make for very conclusive evidence. The man's defiance faltered, and after a moment's futile protest, he slumped into the chair. Holmes signaled the constable who had accompanied us, and Marston was swiftly led away. As we left the boarding house, the fog began to lift. The pale winter sun cast a faint glow across the street, illuminating the lingering frost upon the cobblestones. Holmes walked in silence for several minutes, his mood unusually reflective. "Watson," he said at last, "there are cases that end with triumph, and others with a kind of melancholy justice. This one, I think, belongs to the latter. Crale was guilty, yes, but of weakness, not malice. Marston, however, is the true craftsman of deceit. One cannot help but wonder how many lives he's poisoned with that particular talent." I nodded. "And yet, thanks to you, his reach ends here." Holmes glanced at me with a faint smile. "For now, perhaps, but the world breeds such men faster than justice can cage them. Still, it is enough for one winter morning that truth has prevailed." That evening, back at Baker Street, he returned to his violin. The notes drifted through the lamplit room, strange, haunting, and serene. I watched the firelight flicker upon his sharp profile and thought how curious it was that a man so detached from ordinary sentiment could bring such harmony out of chaos. When he at last set the instrument aside, he looked toward me with a glint of amusement. "You see, Watson," he said, "Christmas may be over, but the ghosts of men's secrets linger long after the holly fades. The world never ceases to conceal its riddles and, Fortunately for us, I should hate to live in a world without them. And as the clock struck midnight, the snow began to fall once more over London softly, but silently, while the greatest mind I had ever known sat smiling at the mysteries yet to come. It was on the final evening of that same week that the last echo of the Pennington affair came unexpectedly knocking upon our door. A messenger boy, pale from the cold, delivered an envelope addressed in a firm and elegant hand to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, 221B Baker Street. Holmes slit it open without a word and unfolded the letter, his eyes narrowing as he read. Then, with a faint smile, he passed it across to me. It was from Sir Alaric Pennington. The note was brief but heartfelt, thanking Holmes once again for his incomparable service and informing him that Mr. Crail had been released on bail pending further inquiry, his conduct having proven more misguided than malicious. Sir Alaric mentioned, too, that a considerable sum had been discovered among Marston's seized effects, money evidently stolen from the Pennington family years ago in Florence, and that, at Holmes's suggestion, it would now be placed in a trust for Arthur, the young heir whose very birth had sparked the deception. Holmes leaned back in his chair, folding the letter neatly. A satisfactory epilogue, is it not, Watson? One I'd almost be tempted to believe in poetic justice. I smiled. You have a peculiar talent, Holmes, for turning even human tragedy into a kind of art. Yet I cannot help wondering what became of Crail. You pitied him more than most criminals. Holmes reached for his pipe, tamping the tobacco thoughtfully. Ah, yes, pity, that most impractical of virtues. I have it on good authority that Crail has enlisted in a medical mission bound for India. Perhaps he seeks redemption where reason has failed him. One cannot wholly condemn a man who errs out of fear rather than greed. The fire crackled softly between us. Outside, the city hummed with its familiar nocturnal rhythm, distant carriage wheels on the wet cobbles, the faint cry of a newspaper boy, and somewhere beyond, the church bells marking 9. For a while, Holmes smoked in silence, his eyes fixed upon the dancing flames. Then, quite suddenly, he said, "Do you recall, Watson, the moment when Crail claimed he came, not to steal, but to prevent something worse? There was truth in that. He misjudged his master, but not his danger." I frowned. "You mean Marston might have gone further still?" "Unquestionably. Men who thrive on blackmail seldom stop at exposure. When their prey ceases to pay, they turn to ruin or murder. Had that letter not been found and secured, I dare say a far darker fate awaited Sir Alaric's household. I rather think Crail's intervention, misguided as it was, prevented tragedy." He rose then and crossed to the window, parting the curtain slightly. The fog lay thick over Baker Street, veiling the gaslights in halos of pale gold. "Observe, Watson. Even now London lies shrouded in her eternal disguise. Each light, each shadow conceals 1,000 untold stories. The Pennington affair was but one among them, a flicker quickly swallowed by the mist." "Yet one more puzzle solved," I said. Holmes's lips twitched. "Solved, yes, but only because men, unlike fog, leave traces. A word, a habit, a scuff of mud upon a boot, all betray more than any confession. You see, my dear fellow, truth never hides from the trained eye. It merely waits for the right observer." He turned away from the window, and there was that peculiar light in his eyes, the same cold fire I had seen when he first spoke of the uninvited guest. "I sometimes think," he added quietly, "that men like Marston exist so that others, perhaps even men like Crail, might prove themselves redeemable. Evil, after all, is not a condition but a choice renewed daily." There was a depth to those words that lingered long after he resumed his chair. I had known Holmes for many years, but at moments such as this I caught glimpses of a rare humanity hidden beneath his austere intellect like warmth behind frosted glass. As the evening deepened, we spoke little more. I occupied myself with writing my notes of the case, though the scratch of my pen was often drowned by the steady crackle of the fire. Holmes drifted into one of his long silences, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the walls of Baker Street, as though already pursuing a new thread of deduction invisible to the rest of mankind. At last, he stirred and glanced toward me. "You will publish this one, I suppose?" "Perhaps," I said, "though it lacks the flourish of your more dramatic adventures." "Good," he murmured, allowing the faintest smile. "Let the world keep its illusions of cheerful Christmases. Some truths are best left veiled, like London in her fog." He rose, reached for his violin, and drew the bow softly across the strings. The sound that followed was neither mournful nor triumphant. It was contemplative, delicate, and strangely beautiful. The melody filled the room like the echo of a memory half remembered. When the last note faded, Holmes set the instrument aside and looked into the fire once more. "You see, Watson," he said, almost to himself. Uninvited guest was not Crail at all. It was truth arriving without warning, unbidden and unwelcome. Yet in the end, it was the only guest that mattered. And so the case closed, leaving behind only the soft whisper of snow against the window pane and the quiet certainty that, in Sherlock Holmes's world, even the coldest winter could not bury the light of reason for long. The following morning dawned pale and still, a thin frost glimmering along Baker Street like powdered glass. I rose early, expecting to find Holmes still asleep after the long week's exertions, but, as ever, he had anticipated me. He stood at the hearth, fully dressed, a thin plume of smoke curling from his pipe, his eyes fixed upon a small envelope lying upon the mantel. Its seal bore the faint impression of the Pennington crest. "Another letter?" I asked, surprised. Holmes nodded without looking up. "Delivered by special messenger at daybreak. It seems the ghost of our Christmas guest refuses to rest." He handed it to me, and I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of fine parchment, penned in a hand I instantly recognized as Sir Alaric's. The note was brief but curious. "Mr. Holmes, I fear our troubles may not be entirely concluded. During the removal of Lady Pennington's effects, my servants discovered a second envelope concealed behind the false back of her escritoire. It is sealed and addressed not to me, but to you. For the sake of discretion, I have sent it enclosed herewith. I trust you will advise whether its contents concern me further. Yours sincerely, Sir Alaric Pennington." Beneath it lay the smaller letter in question, its wax seal brittle with age. Holmes regarded it with mild amusement. "So, even the dead contrived to correspond with me," he murmured, then carefully broke the seal. He unfolded the note, scanning its contents silently. As the seconds passed, I saw a rare change come over him, his brows knitting, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "What is it, Holmes?" I asked at last. He did not immediately answer. Instead, he handed me the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably that of Lady Pennington herself, graceful, elegant, yet trembling with emotion. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, if ever you should chance upon this note, I beg that you judge gently. The truth, which I concealed from my husband and the world, was not mine alone to bear. Marston, my father's secretary, holds letters from Lucien Ferrand, letters that, if published, would not only disgrace me, but imperil others whose names are bound to greater causes than mere scandal. Destroy this knowledge, Mr. Holmes, should it ever reach your hands, for it touches matters of state beyond your comprehension. Trust no one, not even those who come in friendship." I looked up in astonishment. Matters of state? Surely this cannot refer merely to her liaison with Ferrand. Holmes tapped the letter thoughtfully. "No, Watson. The name Lucien Ferrand appears in one other place I can recall among the dispatches of the French diplomatic service in the mid-80s. He was suspected of espionage in connection with a certain trade treaty between France and England. If Lady Pennington was in correspondence with him, even innocently, her letters may have contained information of political value. It would explain why Marston coveted them so fiercely and why she begged for their destruction. Then Crail may have stumbled into a web far larger than he imagined, I said slowly. Precisely, Holmes replied. He was a pawn upon a board whose boundaries neither he nor his master understood. He paced the length of the room, lost in thought. The fire crackled, and a gust of winter air rattled the window pane. It appears, my dear Watson, he said finally, that what began as a domestic deception veiled a diplomatic intrigue. The letter's warning is clear enough others may yet seek what remains of that correspondence. I frowned. Then you intend to act upon it? Holmes smiled faintly. No, I intend to act against it. The lady's wish shall be fulfilled. He took the letter, folded it carefully, and cast it into the fire. The flames licked at the paper, consuming the elegant script until nothing remained but a curl of ash. There, he said softly, a secret restored to silence. The living are safer for the dead's discretion. For a time, we stood watching the ashes drift upward in the hearth's glow. The street outside was stirring to life, the cry of the milkman, the clatter of wheels, the steady rhythm of ordinary London returning to its endless routine. Yet within the room, a peculiar hush lingered, as though some chapter of history had quietly closed. At last, Holmes turned away from the fire, the faintest smile at the corner of his lips. You see, Watson, truth, like fire, must be tended carefully. Left unchecked, it burns all it touches, but when contained, it gives warmth enough to light a cold morning. He drew his dressing gown about him and moved toward his violin, the familiar ritual marking the quiet conclusion of another case. As the bow touched the strings, a gentle melody filled the air, melancholy yet peaceful, like the sigh of snow against the window pane. When he finished, he looked at me with that curious mixture of irony and sincerity that so defined him. There will be other mysteries, Watson, other uninvited guests. But for now, let us allow this one to rest. London will provide another puzzle soon enough. And as the last of the ashes faded in the grate, I could not help but think how right he was, for wherever secrets hid behind smiles and deception cloaked itself in respectability, Sherlock Holmes would never lack for work. The year turned quietly after that strange Christmas, and though London resumed its ordinary rhythm of scandal and smoke, I could not shake the impression that the Pennington affair had left a peculiar mark upon Holmes. He spoke of it rarely, yet I sometimes caught him gazing absently into the fire as though replaying unseen events, calculations that extended beyond the realm of mere human motive. For my part, I considered the case concluded in every sense. Crail had departed for India, Marston had been sentenced to 7 years for forgery and fraud, and Sir Alaric's household had returned to calm domestic order. Yet one evening, in late January, Holmes summoned me from my reading with a remark that stirred the embers of that wintry mystery once more. "Watson," he said, without looking up from the chemical burner before him, "I have received word that Marston has escaped custody." I started. Escaped? Good heavens! How? When? Last night, from the train conveying him to Wandsworth Prison. He feigned illness and slipped his escort near Clapham Junction. Scotland Yard is predictably bewildered. Do you believe he will attempt to recover the Pennington papers? Holmes smiled faintly. Impossible. They are ash. Yet criminals, like poets, are driven less by logic than by obsession. Marston's ego will not allow him to rest until he proves himself the cleverer man. He moved to the window, gazing through the thin veil of fog that always seemed to haunt Baker Street. There are minds, Watson, that would rather perish than admit defeat. I suspect he will seek me directly, not as a fugitive, but as a duelist. "Holmes," I exclaimed, "surely you exaggerate." "Perhaps," he said mildly. "Yet I have learned to respect the vanity of desperate men." The following nights passed uneventfully, though I noticed Holmes's heightened vigilance. He kept his revolver within easy reach and seldom permitted the gas lamps to burn too low. Then, on the 5th night, his prediction came true. It was close to midnight when a firm knock sounded at the door below. Mrs. Hudson, long accustomed to Holmes's irregular visitors, came timidly to inform us that a gentleman had called, pale, trembling, and insisting on immediate conversation. Holmes and I exchanged a glance, and he nodded. "Show him up." A moment later, Henry Marston stood before us. The once polished forger was now a ruin of his former self, hollow-cheeked, disheveled, his eyes burning with a feverish light. He bowed stiffly, his manner neither defiant nor humble. "I have not come to beg, Mr. Holmes," he said hoarsely. "Only to understand." "Understand what?" Holmes asked, motioning him to sit. "How you saw through me," Marston whispered. "I spent years perfecting my craft. The letters, the handwriting, the seals, every detail flawless. Yet you unmasked me within hours." "How?" Holmes regarded him coolly. "Because deceit, sir, always bears its author's fingerprint, the touch of vanity. Your letters were too perfect, too deliberate. The genuine is never so careful. In the smallest flaw lies truth." Marston gave a strange, cracked laugh. "Flaw? You speak as though honesty itself were a kind of accident." "In a way, it is," Holmes replied. "An involuntary reflex of the soul. You could forge words, but not the tremor of sincerity that accompanies them." For a moment, the fugitive sat silent, his thin hands gripping the chair's arms. Then he rose abruptly. "You are right, of course. You see through men as though they were glass. But tell me, does it not weary you, Mr. Holmes, to know so much and feel so little?" Holmes's eyes darkened. "On the contrary, it is ignorance that exhausts me." A long pause followed. Then, with a sudden, almost theatrical gesture, Marston drew from his pocket a small revolver. I half rose, but Holmes merely lifted a hand. "Peace, Watson," he said quietly. "Our visitor has come for words, not blood." Marston's hand trembled. "I meant only to frighten you, perhaps to reclaim my pride. But I see now you are beyond it. There is no triumph in besting a man who feels nothing." Holmes's voice was low and steady. "You are mistaken, Marston. I feel pity for minds such as yours, built for brilliance and wasted upon deception. Leave England. Go where your name means nothing. Begin again, if you can." The revolver slipped from Marston's grasp and clattered to the floor. He stood there for an instant, eyes unfocused, then turned without another word and vanished into the fog beyond the doorway. When I looked back at Holmes, he was already seated, his expression unreadable. "He will not trouble the world much longer," he said softly. "You think he'll?" Holmes shook his head. "No, not yet. But men who live by falsehood cannot long endure the weight of truth." Later, as the lamplight flickered low and the street outside grew silent again, I thought of the strange symmetry of it all, the uninvited guest who had brought deception to light, the liar who sought redemption through confession, and Holmes himself, that eternal watcher at the threshold between reason and chaos. When at last I put down my pen, Holmes was gazing once more into the fire. "Watson," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder what becomes of those whose lies we expose?" "I do," I answered, "but I take comfort in knowing you've given them at least the chance to face the truth." He smiled faintly. "Ah, yes, the truth. The only guest that is never invited, yet always arrives." And with that, the great detective turned back to the flames, their light glinting against his sharp profile, while outside, the fog thickened once more over Baker Street, folding London in silence, secrecy, and the eternal promise of another mystery waiting to be found. The following morning brought an unusual clarity to Baker Street. The fog that had cloaked the city for days had lifted, leaving the gas lamps glittering faintly along the streets, and a thin frost crusted the window panes like crystal lace. Holmes sat before the fire, pipe in hand, staring at the dancing embers with a distant yet precise focus, while I arranged my notes on the Pennington case, determined to capture the final reflection on its curious events. "You seem unusually contemplative, Holmes," I remarked, folding my pen. "Have you concluded that this affair is, at last, truly finished?" Holmes shook his head slowly. "Finished in one sense, perhaps, but never complete. A case is rarely a single line. It is a web. Consider Crail, Marston, the burned letter, and Lady Pennington's final warning. Each action, each choice, interwove to form a pattern visible only to those who observe carefully." He tapped the side of his pipe thoughtfully. "It is precisely this interconnection that fascinates me. One cannot remove a thread without altering the entire design." I nodded. "And yet, despite all, peace has returned to Pennington Hall. The household can resume its quiet domesticity, and the secrets of the dead remain buried." Holmes reclined his head. "Yes, for now. But human nature, being what it is, the desire for discovery, for advantage, seldom rests. That is why I insisted upon the destruction of Lady Pennington's second letter. The truth it contained might have been weaponized, even in inadvertent hands. A secret revealed is a shadow that walks even in daylight." There was a pause as the room fell silent, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of a distant cab along the cobblestones. I could see that, despite his composed exterior, Holmes carried a weight beyond the usual satisfaction of a case closed. "Do you ever tire, Holmes?" I asked softly. "Of always unmasking the truth, of following men like Marston and Crail through their deceptions?" He smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Tire? Hardly, Watson. One cannot tire of reasoning. The human mind, in its infinite variety, presents puzzles that renew themselves endlessly. What fatigues me is the cruelty that men inflict when reason is absent. It is that which I strive to counteract." I reflected upon the events once more, the shadowed halls of Pennington Hall, the hidden letters, Crail's trembling hand, Marston's desperate flight, and the silent dignity of Lady Pennington preserved through the careful judgment of Holmes. In all of it, I realized, there was a rare elegance, a demonstration of the delicate balance between justice, mercy, and discretion. Holmes rose then and crossed to the window, peering at the streets below. "Observe, Watson," he said. "London sleeps under a blanket of normalcy. Yet beneath this calm, men plot, deceive, and aspire. Some achieve greatness, others ruin. The wise watch, and the rest stumble into their own errors." He turned back toward me, his expression unusually soft. "It is the interplay between human folly and vigilance that gives life its texture. Without it, there would be nothing to observe, nothing to decipher, nothing to preserve." I could not help but marvel at the profound truth behind his words. For in the Pennington case, we had seen both darkness and light, selfishness and selflessness, deceit and integrity, and through it all, Holmes had navigated the labyrinth of human motives with an unwavering clarity that left me both astonished and humbled. "The Pennington affair, then," I said, "is a fitting example of your methods: observation, deduction, and the exercise of judgment." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, and let us not forget, Watson, that in every deception there is a single thread of truth, often hidden, often overlooked. Find that thread, and the tapestry unravels." He returned to his chair, picked up the violin, and began to play. The melody was subdued, introspective, and hauntingly beautiful, and appropriate close to a case that had involved such delicate human intricacies. I sat back and listened, the final words of the Pennington saga echoing in my mind, that truth, though uninvited, will always arrive, and that discretion, when exercised wisely, is a virtue as essential as courage. As the final notes faded, Holmes set aside his instrument and turned toward me. "Watson, The Christmas guest may have gone. Marston is gone, and Crail has departed for distant shores. Yet we remain, the witnesses to the intricate design of human nature, and rest assured, when the next mystery arrives, one will inevitably do so. We shall be ready. I smiled. As always, Holmes, ready to observe, to reason, and to preserve the fragile balance between deception and truth. He allowed a faint smile, one that conveyed satisfaction rather than triumph. Outside, London's streets gleamed with frost and the promise of a new day. And within 221B, a quiet peace settled over the room, a calm only attainable when a great mind has brought order to chaos, and when the shadows of human folly have been, at least for a time, illuminated by reason. The case of the Christmas guest who wasn't invited had ended, leaving behind lessons in prudence, human nature, and the enduring brilliance of Sherlock Holmes. And as always, I remained, recording the events with admiration for the man who sees all yet reveals only what is necessary.